just like a giant tree, reaching out towards the sky. We are family, more than just you and I. We're growing stronger, wiser, family.
Hello, and welcome to the second season of the We Build Families podcast. Of course, this podcast is created to provide a space for Christians to talk about everyday issues that we may not have the opportunity to do so in church. You can find this podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts as well. And on today's episode, we are going to tackle a difficult but necessary subject involving domestic violence. I have with me today Miss Adrienne Banks. She is a domestic abuse advocate. She's been doing this job for 15 years, serving our community. And so she's an expert in this particular area. So we're going to speak with her. Miss Adrienne, how are you today?
I'm good. Good morning, Pastor Brian. Listen, what a privilege and an honor. I am like so honored and privileged that you would choose me to talk about such a very important subject. So thank you and good morning to you.
Good morning to you as well. Of course, these types of topics are um, historically hidden and swept under the rug in our community,
Yes.
but it's something that I believe we really need to highlight for our listeners, as well as just anyone else that is secretly dealing with this. So, the first thing I wanted to ask is what does domestic violence look like? I know historically we've all seen the physical side of it, but is there more to this problem in our community?
Yes, domestic violence is just a pattern of behaviors. It's the cycle of violence, oftentimes, that is spoken about. And so, domestic abuse and the violence that's associated with it can look like in threats, death threats. If you leave me, I'll harm you, I'll harm your family. Nobody will want you. Intimidation, using intimidation tactics, hand gestures, facial expressions. Oftentimes, when a victim is in public with their abuser and they've done something that was displeasing to the abuser, oftentimes there's a look and there's a stare, and the victim knows exactly what that means. Isolation is really one of the main points as well. Isolation looks like this. Let's say you had 20 friends and now you're down to 5, and over a course of time the abuser starts to isolate you from family and friends, from your support system. Economic abuse is another one. Oftentimes victims are responsible for a lot of the heavy um, financial responsibilities in the family. Oftentimes I've seen it where abusers have put you know bills and mortgages and credit cards in the victim's name. And that actually makes them very heavy in the debt area. So if they ever leave the abuser, their credit is destroyed. They oftentimes are not able to find apartments. Um, Also, the abusers minimize, deny that the abuse is happening, and then they blame the victim. Um, Emotional abuse, excessive name calling, demeaning, um, blaming the victim for the abuse. And then there's the honeymoon period. The abuser begs for forgiveness. I'll never do it again. I'll go get counseling. I'll stop drinking. They promise to change. And then oftentimes they'll give very expensive or lavish gifts. Sometimes it's flowers or a diamond ring or jewelry or a car. And so those are some of the dynamics of domestic abuse, and even using the children to relay messages, uh, uh, emotionally abusing the victim in front of the children, demeaning behavior, acting like king or queen of the castle, making all the hard decisions and never including the victim.
Wow, that is a lot of information. Much of it I
It's a
didn't even
lot.
really know. Um,
Mhm.
so I hear you use the word abuser instead of giving it saying he or she or him or her, because I think
Yes,
historically we've always felt that the male is the primary abuser, but do you see cases for females being the perpetrator? Is Are those cases increasing as well?
absolutely. And so I believe that it's always happened. However, because of awareness, because we're here speaking on this subject, that men feel a little bit more comfortable now reporting that they are victims of abuse. Um, they're just like the female victim. A victim is a victim. You know, they love the person, they hope that they change, and they even fear leaving them or fear that they'll never see their children again, or the fear also is that people will expect them to leave. It takes a victim, whether male or female, 8 to 88 times to leave an abusive relationship. And oftentimes family members are just at odds because they don't understand why victims stay. So I believe it's because of the awareness that men have started to come forward and say, hey, this is happening to me and I need help. Oftentimes their masculinity is in question. You know, the shame,
Yeah,
there's a lot of shame that comes with this too, and guilt. Um, Oftentimes it may be religion. So for example, I know that I had a male victim one time, and he was he had a Catholic background, and he said that he didn't want to be the only person, the first person to go through a divorce in his family, because his family looked down on divorce. So he remained in a relationship with his abuser, his female abuser, because of religious reasons.
interesting. And you it sounds like there's a lot of pressure internally, externally, when it comes to speaking up about the abuse that's happening. And I know a lot of times, I think naturally men have like a pride about them, and if that pride is being diminished in any way, yeah, no, I know I would be very um, I would isolate myself, like you mentioned,
Right.
and even try to put on some front outside of my home that is not happening. And, yeah, there seems to be a cycle that, from just the way that we're made as men, if we're dealing with that and we don't have a way to handle it personally, I can see how heavy of a burden that would be for
Yes.
anyone to try to admit that in a public setting.
Well, I think about it when we were children. Girls, we play with those dolls and we dress them all up. Remember Ken and Barbie, and
Right.
Ken played with trucks, and so this whole fairy tale situation where it's okay for a girl to cry. Oftentimes, men have been told, our boys, we told them, "Don't you cry, don't you cry," and so women will enter into a setting and they'll start to discuss. But oftentimes, when men gather together, they talk about other things. And
Right.
so, what my goal is to make sure that everyone understands that they have a right to feel safe in their relationship, male or female.
Good. 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 So when it comes to actually um, going through the process of submitting a report, one thing that I think we've seen is some of the authorities haven't always been able to properly identify the root of a problem whenever they come, or whenever like the cops are called or something like that. And so, given like the climate of the issues with police. One of the things that was a solution that I've heard to kind of avoid, the brutality that we see is to have specialized people who can recognize, the true issues and have the proper solutions, in the moment. Um, is that something that is being talked about in these particular circles, as far as being able to properly aid the people who are dealing with this?
Yes, so I am a member of the Cattle Bozier Domestic Violence Task Force, and again, that is Cattle Bozier Domestic Violence Task Force, and so they are on Facebook. Um, I encourage people to go and like their page. The president is Miss Latienda. She is an awesome woman. So we gather once a month, and all the service providers, whether it's homicide, the district attorney's office, advocates from all over, nurses, counselors, um, attorneys, we all gather together. Some colleges, people from the law enforcement from colleges, we all gather together once a month to talk about how we can come together and provide resources and even share our resources. Even we receive updates on domestic violence law. So there is a task force where we discuss the community, even the rural areas we're very concerned about because of the lack of resources. And so as we gather together, we provide supportive services to all those helping agencies.
Okay, great, 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 great. Because the biggest thing I think that I wanted to accomplish with this particular episode was to make sure that we, of course, shine light on the problem,
Yeah.
understand that there's so many more facets to domestic violence than what you're being told and what you see like on TV and things like that, and then to also provide resources and the help needed for those who are dealing with this but may not have a way of reaching out. So, can you provide some resources, tips of how to you know talk to somebody about this if they've been dealing with it?
So again, I want to start here by saying if anyone, who is watching this podcast, broadcast, if you are a victim of abuse, male or female, or even a teenager, listen, please do not end your relationship alone with your abuser. Do not alert them. That's when things start to escalate. When we oftentimes are watching the news and we know there's been a homicide or someone has been hurt, um, oftentimes the discussion of ending the relationship was there prior to the escalation and then the incident. So again, listen, I'm going to provide some resources. Please do not discuss divorce, separation, custody issues along with the abuser. A third party person should be present, such as law enforcement or court personnel. That is the most dangerous time when a victim decides, I can't take it anymore and I want to leave. Please do not alert the abuser. And so, what I do recommend is that, so Project Celebration, let's talk about them. Listen, I'm an advocate for the Air Force. So, of course, I don't speak on behalf of the Air Force. I'm unable to do that. However, I've been an advocate before in shelter work. And so most of the times we would see the children and the women. Um, Louisiana is getting so much better at providing resources for men. But Project Celebration, their phone number is 318 226 5015. And again, Project Celebration's number is 318 226 5015. And so in the state of Louisiana, they are the service provider for Caddo Parish, Bossier Parish, I think Webster Parish. I think they serve 9 parishes. They have counseling. They can actually assist victims with shelter. I do believe they have some DV groups, and so they have an outreach office. They are a great service provider. Kudos to Project Celebration and all of their staff. So there is a local organization that can help victims. Um, Also, the YWCA of Northwest Louisiana, They provide free trauma counseling for women and teens, and that's the YWCA. They provide free trauma counseling because the trauma of domestic violence and the abuse, even the emotional abuse that's associated with this, it can be very traumatizing. And their phone number is 318 550 4417. They provide free counseling. And then we have the Family Justice Center. Now, if someone wants to make a police report, they can go to their local police department, but the Family Justice Center, they'll provide a police report along with a protective order. So I attend an annual training. I am able to assist victims with protective orders in the place where I work. I learned it when I worked at the shelter. And again, it's the Louisiana Protective Order Registry is where I received my annual training. But Northwest Louisiana Family Justice Center, their phone number is 318 584 7171. They can assist with police reports and also protective orders.
Oh, great. Thank you so
One more
much.
thing.
Come on.
So listen,
Come on.
each state, I'm sorry. You know what? Listen, I'm trying to go down my list because this is a very serious subject. It is so hard to talk about. It is not easy being an advocate for those who are victims of domestic violence and intimate partner sexual assault. There's an intersection oftentimes between domestic violence and sexual assault. Yes, there is. Because so if you're in a marriage, you know, you figure, well, how can I be sexually assaulted? If you're in an intimate partner relationship, how can I be a victim of sexual assault? Is forced sex. You know, we need to talk about this. Listen, you know, some people are into certain dominations and certain things when it comes to sex and intimacy in their own private home, but sophisticated abusers will take advantage of and strangulation. They'll take advantage of those things. And oftentimes victims have shared with me that, you know, there's a code word when the pressure on the neck or when they're being intimate, there's a code word, which is a safe word. Well, sophisticated abusers don't always honor the safe word. And so they can use that to say, oh, well, I didn't know. And so strangulation is very, very, very prevalent in intimate partner relationships where there's a lot of domination in sex. Oftentimes, even if that's not the case, abusers will use strangulation to control their victim. And so again, we have a national hotline, the national hotline, because every state has a coalition. So just in the event that there's someone watching from California, California has a coalition against domestic violence. Louisiana has a coalition against domestic violence. So if you need resources, contact your local, your state agency. Just look up Texas Coalition for Domestic Violence, and all the resources for your state should be on that page, sir.
Great information. That's awesome to know that there's always help and resources available. And again, I want to thank you so much for coming on this podcast. This is information that I personally did not know about, and I will make sure that I use this platform to share and to help everyone out. Because again, you know, the purpose of this podcast is to build stronger families and to be honest about what's happening in our home. So I want to thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. Like I mentioned earlier, you can find this podcast wherever podcasts are available. You'll also be able to watch this episode on YouTube as well. So you can just search for Brian Mitchell, We Build Families podcast, and it'll direct you to all of the videos for this particular podcast. One other thing that I would like for you guys to do as well is, if you are an Apple listener, if you could rate this episode 5 stars, hopefully, and leave a comment as to how we can help you and how this episode has blessed you. So again, on behalf of my guest, Adrian Banks, I am Pastor B. You've been listening to the We Build Families podcast. Thank you guys so much, and you have a great rest of your day.